Money makes the world go round, but not always in the best direction. In the world of sports, there's always been a massive problem of money on the inside, but more prominently on the outside. Match fixing is when the outcome of a sports game is fixed for one person to win and the other to lose. Yet, it comes in many different forms, strategies, and there are different culprits behind it. Match fixing has been a problem in sports since the very creation of them. However, it's evolved into a massive problem that plagues sports around the world. Betting syndicates, the mobs, criminal organizations, and even coaches and sometimes players can get in on the scheme and throw games for a ton of cash. The scheme of match fixing has unlimited reach and seemingly unlimited resources. In this episode, I will share a collection of cases of match fixing from different sports around the world. With each story, it becomes more apparent the reach of match fixing and the plethora of ways it can go down, making it an almost unstoppable problem in sports all around the globe.
Tonight marks the 100th anniversary of a notorious moment in baseball history, the White Sox losing to the Cincinnati Reds in the 1919 World Series. The scandal that followed stained the sport's reputation and is still talked about to this day.
A stunning new report has revealed that hundreds of matches at the top level of European football were fixed.
Discovered corruption in 380 professional matches across Europe.
Kenyan football is currently under threat due to the rapid rise in reports of match fixing over the last few years.
With the match fixing wreaking havoc across the world.
And the figures are startling. Police in 13 European countries are investigating 425 club officials, match officials, players and serious criminals.
Danish Canaria played over 60 test matches and took nearly 300 wickets in international matches for Pakistan. But in 2012, his career came to a sudden end. He was banned for life by English cricket's governing body for match fixing. Canaria says the ban has had a devastating effect on his life.
I lost my friends, the respect which I used to get from the cricketing fans and everything. I lost everything.
The sport that's been the most riddled with match fixing through the previous decades has been world football, or soccer. Match fixing has had a long history in soccer, and it has affected both the smaller countries and leagues and some of the biggest leagues in the entire world. One of the 5 major leagues in world football, the Serie A, or Italian league, saw a massive match fixing scandal in 1980 called the Totonero scandal. While there was already suspicion that Italian players were fixing games before this scandal, the Totonero scandal far exceeded those previous allegations in scale. In the 1970s, betting in Italy was much more difficult than today. To win a bet, individuals would need to correctly guess all of the weekend's 12 or 13 matches to win the single bet. Alternatively, individuals could also make money from betting the exact score of a game. So, a restaurant owner in Rome named Alvaro Trinca and his supplier Massimo Cruciani fixed up a scheme to fix games and win money. Trinca's restaurant was a favorite of 2 local soccer teams in Lazio and AS Roma that were both based in Rome. They approached some of the players and bribed them to fix matches so they could win their bets. They would also come in contact with other teams and would bring them in on the scam as well, notably with players and even the team president of AC Milan. With the agreements in place, the first match that would be fixed was between AC Milan and Lazio, where Milan would win 2-1. Trinca and Cruciani made a ton of money from that game. However, they soon realized that their scam wasn't really going the way that they planned, as in the next few games didn't go the way that they wanted them to. In total, Trinca and Cruciani ended up losing over 100 million lire in those subsequent matches. When Trinca and Cruciani went under massive debt because of their losses, they decided to lawyer up and go to the police and tell on all the players and what they did and how they were involved in their betting scheme. The fallout of this scandal landed the president of AC Milan and also Bologna, who also agreed with Trinca and Cruciani to fix matches, to be detained as well as suspended. Additionally, 20 players would be handed multi-year bans from the sport. But This wouldn't be the last big Italian soccer scandal. In 2005 and 2006, Italian soccer would see another match-fixing scandal, which is lauded by many fans as the biggest scandal in world football history, named Calciopoli. At that time, there was a heated and close rivalry between the teams of AC Milan and Juventus, both of which are Italian clubs with major world prestige and were some of the best in the world and the Italian league. Both teams, but especially Juventus, was monitored closely at this time because of allegations of doping. However, when authorities were tapping phone calls from the club, a new interesting allegation popped up. In the phone calls, the police discovered that referees were getting pressured by big clubs to swing the game in their favor. Not only that, but apparently the president of Juventus, Luciano Moggi, was hand-picking referees for their games that he thought would give his team favorable calls. Once the Italian FA found out about it, not just Juventus, but AC Milan, Lazio, and Fiorentina were all involved in the situation. They found that they would favor massively over refereeing decisions in which they had been caught in having influence over, or even deciding referees. The fallout of the second big Italian soccer scandal would send Juventus to be relegated to the second division of Italian soccer, as well as being stripped of their Italian League championship the year prior. While world soccer's history has been flooded with match fixing, it hasn't gotten much better in recent years. According to an organization that works closely with FIFA, UEFA, and other top brass in the world soccer industry, named Sports Radar, there have been 1,100 games that have been questioned for match fixing since the pandemic started a few years ago, with some of these games being extremely blatant, like a game between two South African teams where the score ended up being 59-1. However, with the sheer scale of this match-fixing problem in world football, it doesn't seem like the problem will slow down anytime soon. Like soccer, tennis has been another sport that has struggled with corruption and match-fixing. And with it being an individual sport, the problem in many cases is more severe and harder to stop. There are constant allegations being thrown around tennis and constant suspicions of match fixing between lower tier players and even top 50 ranked players alike.
Another tennis corruption bombshell, this one involving two well-known players, and today one of them is blasting the media reports. Now, in case you missed it, former Australian Open semifinalist Aslan Karatsev, former world number 16 Nicholas Basilashvili, and a coach are all being investigated about match-fixing charges, according to German network ZDF.
With tennis being a sport for individuals, it makes the problem of match-fixing much more uncontrollable. All it takes is one person, whether it's a random individual, a friend or family member, or even a coach, to get in a player's ear. And once a player agrees, it's all but certain the match will be fixed. Even more so, when potential match fixers get a hold of one player, it seems their influence is easy to spread from player to player.
What connects these two players is Belarusian coach Yahor Yatsik. ZDF claims to have obtained documents from the International Tennis Federation that show Yatsik persuaded players to fix matches. Yatsik coached Karatsev from 2018 to 2021. ZDF reports authorities are also investigating Aslan Karatsev on 5 cases of match fixing. A 2019 doubles match in Finland is one of them, another 2020 doubles match in Kazakhstan, and an opening round Stuttgart doubles match included in those 5. Both coach Yatsik and Karatsev were questioned by French police regarding corruption during the 2020 Roland Garros. ZDF reports that Karatsev initially at that time gave a statement, but then he retracted it. Interesting aside to this case is Karatsev's ex-girlfriend, Sofia Dmitrieva. She was given a lifetime ban for betting fraud back in January of 2021. The former women's tour player was accused of 6 different match-fixing incidents, and she declined to cooperate in that investigation.
With the constant cases of corruption in tennis, it began to draw a stark and combative line between much of tennis media and their players.
Nicholas Basilashvili issued a statement denying the report, saying he has retained a law firm in Germany to protect his interests. He says there is no basis for the accusations and will not accept any damage to his reputation.
With how widespread the corruption can be in tennis, it doesn't mean that it can't be super large in scale. Just last year, police discovered one of the largest sports scandals in history in the world of tennis by an Armenian man named Grigor Sargsyan, nicknamed the Maestro.
An Armenian immigrant in Brussels who recruited over 180 professional tennis players across 4 continents and paid them to lose parts of their matches so that he could then gamble on those matches and make a small fortune.
Sargsyan and his family moved to Brussels, Belgium from Armenia when he was 9 years old. In Belgium, he moved to one of the poor neighborhoods in the country. In his new experience as a Belgian citizen, Sargsyan would adapt to his surroundings, but still made sure to keep close ties and connections with people in Armenia. Fast forward some years later, and Sargsyan was a young man attending law school. In his friend group, gambling, especially tennis gambling, was a frequent topic they discussed and enjoyed talking about. It would get Sargsyan wondering if there was a way for him to bet on tennis, but be sure of the outcome ahead of the time. After a bit of research, Sargsyan found that players ranked outside of the top 200 in the tennis world were paid extremely little. And that would be the start of what prosecutors last year deemed one of the largest match-fixing files ever seen. Sargsyan would start off by targeting tennis players on the lower end of the wage scale. Sargsyan would rarely try to bribe players to flat out lose a match, but instead would bribe them with more money to lose a specific set than these players would normally get paid from the entire match. What started as a couple of fixed matches in Belgium would later turn into a network of players at his disposal in the years to come.
Grigor was a young guy in his early 20s who managed to recruit one player at one tournament in Belgium. And that player introduced him to another player, and within 2, 3, or 4 years, he had over 180 players across 4 continents. And one of the reasons he was able to do it so successfully is he wasn't just recruiting individual players, he would end up recruiting like almost entire teams of players.
By 2016, Sargsyan garnered a massive influence in the world of tennis, and almost every professional tennis player knew who he was. Sargsyan had a gift for connecting with people. He would often just randomly show up at tennis tournaments regularly, from one tournament in Spain to the next one in Belgium. He could fluently and effortlessly speak 5 different languages, and would also regularly buy players and their families gifts that he was connected with. He quickly became at the forefront, at least on the inside of the tennis world, and while everyone knew Sargsyan as the Maestro, or one of his many nicknames, few actually knew much about Sargsyan as a guy before his ascent in the tennis world. Kevin CF, an investigative correspondent at the Washington Post who covered this story heavily, shared his insight on the character or characters of Sargsyan.
He's a guy who got to Brussels from Armenia when he was 9 years old. He learned the way that I think a lot of immigrant kids do, how to exist in 2 worlds. He sold himself as this rich kid wearing a Rolex when he was at the tennis tournaments, but he was also able to exchange messages with members of an organized crime group. I think he felt like he was able to exercise power that as a young immigrant in Brussels, he'd never been able to do. All of a sudden, he became a powerful figure in a world that for a lot of years had excluded him.
A good portion of the money that Sargsyan would make fixing matches would be sent over to a criminal organization in Armenia. And throughout his run fixing matches, he would also be closely tied to them every step of the way. By 2017, Sargsyan already built a substantial network and would only continue to grow. Over the years, Sargsyan became more and more wary that the police were catching on to him. With the sheer scale of the players Sargsyan had on his roster, and the expansive connections he had with people also betting money alongside him, it would only be a matter of time before he got caught. And so, the night of his arrest, it was 3 a.m. when the police would storm his parents' apartment in Brussels, Belgium, and would arrest Sargsyan after a raid that was planned months in advance. At the time Sargsyan was being arrested, he was exchanging messages with a Bulgarian pro player, Alexandrina Naidanova, about potentially throwing a set or 2 of her next match that would happen in only a few hours in Thailand. In a match-fixing run that would include over 180 professional tennis players, ranging from 20 plus countries and 4 different continents, that would be Sargsyan's final offer. Although all we have talked about are worldwide sports in tennis and in soccer, the scale of the problem of match fixing is not necessarily absent from the United States either. And in fact, about a decade ago, the NBA had their own major match fixing problem.
In 2007, the NBA was rocked to its core when the news hit that referee Tim Donaghy had admitted that he had illegally bet on games he himself had officiated.
Tim Donaghy was a referee that was previously held in high regard in the NBA and frequently ranked towards the top of active referees. However, there was an ulterior motive for Donaghy's refereeing decisions that affected many outcomes for the better part of 4 seasons in the NBA.
Basketball is especially vulnerable to fixing in a way that other sports aren't. For referees, it's simple. To benefit one team, all they have to do is call fouls on the other team. And because fouls are so common in the game and so subjective and discretionary, fixing can be hard to detect.
There are 4 major players in this story who all went to the same high school outside of Philadelphia together at Cardinal O'Hara High School. Tim Donaghy, the culprit and NBA referee, Jack Concannon, a longtime friend of Donaghy, and Pete Ruggieri, a Philadelphia-based bookmaker, and Jimmy Batista, another Philadelphia-based bookmaker. Donaghy worked his way up to being an NBA ref like anyone else would, through reffing high school games to college games, and then eventually being hired for NBA games. However, in an interview with DJ Vlad, Donaghy would talk about how he got into betting shortly after being hired by the NBA.
So when did the actual gambling start with you?
I think it started right when I started to join country clubs after I got hired by the NBA, playing in golf matches and playing in card games in the locker room afterwards, and then getting in the car and running down to Atlantic City, which was only about an hour and 15 minutes away from where we lived. I think that's where it all kind of started to snowball for me.
I mean, did you feel you had a gambling problem early on?
Not early on. I think eventually it got to that point where I was just consumed with betting on everything, whether it was golf, cards, football, baseball, anything really, just, place a bet and watch it on TV.
In 2003, Donaghy would bet on his first NBA game and give picks to his friend Jack Concannon.
The first time I placed a bet on an NBA game was I was at home and I was looking at the Philadelphia Daily News, and every day I would look at the lines and the spreads, and I also looked at the referee's master schedule of who was officiating games that day. And then I went over to the country club to play golf, and my buddy asked me to give him a couple plays in the NBA that night, and I rattled off 3 games to him, and they all won. And the next day he called me up and asked me if it was that easy, and I said it was, based on who was officiating the games.
Later, Donaghy would take another step and start gambling on games that he was actually refereeing in.
Most of the games that you bet on were games that you were a referee in, right?
Not in the beginning, they weren't, but it eventually spilled into that when I would be in the lunchroom or locker room or pregame meeting and know that certain things were going to be done in that game that night and certain teams were going to be put at an advantage or a disadvantage. I would spill that information over to the people that I was gambling with and started to bet on games that I officiated.
What started out as a minor operation between Donaghy and his friend Concannon betting on games that may or may not have been manipulated by Donaghy, it turned into a larger scale scandal than they may have previously thought.
I had a friend, Jack Concannon, who we were betting on everything together, baseball, basketball, football, and I would give him the picks and he was placing the bets.
Okay, did you feel that was safe enough at that point for you?
I always told him, don't place the bets through a guy named Pete Ruggieri, who was a guy that knew us both. He told me he wasn't, but, I found out that he was, and that guy was able to piece things together that Jack all of a sudden started winning a high number of NBA games, and what he started to do was piggyback the bets and bet hundreds of thousands of dollars off of whatever Jack was betting.
Pete Ruggieri was a broker/bookie or odds maker that handled bets in the Philadelphia area. Ruggieri knew both Donaghy and Concannon from the country club they all went to regularly. Concannon, before conspiring with Donaghy, bet under Ruggieri and would continue betting under his book once conspiring with Donaghy. The information or the tips that Donaghy would give to Concannon would dramatically spike Concannon's winning rate on his bets. Ruggieri put 2 and 2 together and assumed that Donaghy was giving picks and possibly fixing games ahead of time for Concannon and his bets. Over time, Ruggieri learned to copy the bets that Concannon and Donaghy were taking because of their unbelievable win rate on them. Soon, other major players within the illegal Philadelphia gambling ring would also take notice. Jimmy Batista was another major player in that illegal Philadelphia gambling ring, and he would take notice of Donaghy. Batista got his bearing from a man named Mike Renier, who was a wealthy man in the Delaware County area. He would often employ Batista to go to Vegas and put in bets for Renier. With the money Batista earned in that job, he began making moves of his own in the gambling world. He started an organization named The Animals, who would place bets of their own with inside information in the various sports and teams. While Batista and his organization was gaining massive success, Batista couldn't stop there. He had caught wind of Donaghy and Concannon's scheme. In an interview with Vice Sports, Batista talked about his prior knowledge of Donaghy and the point of reaching out to him.
You know, I knew he was in high school. I played football with his brother Jimmy. His brother Jimmy was a great athlete. Timmy was a decent athlete himself, a little arrogant, obnoxious. I knew at this point he became an NBA referee. I knew who he was, and I didn't think at that point, like, you know, here I am escalating up the scale in my life as a gambler that, you know, I'm going to contact an NBA official. There was a few games that I thought that were noteworthy that he transformed. Spurs were playing Charlotte Hornets, and I remember within the first quarter, Tim Duncan had 2 fouls called on him. They're going to sit him. That changes everything. I'm like, man, this guy can call a game great.
The relationship between Donaghy and Batista started with the help of a mutual friend in Tommy Martino. One night, Batista would call for Martino to meet up with him to talk about something they couldn't talk about over the phone. Over the past 3 or 4 years at that point, Batista had been seeing the results Donaghy was putting up, and he finally made the call that instead of tailing or copying Donaghy and Concannon's bets, he wanted to assume complete control over the referee. In 2006, Donaghy would meet Batista and Martino at a hotel restaurant. In Martino's recollection of the event, both parties were nervous, but there was no extortions or threats. Yet, once Batista told Donaghy he knew he was giving tips to Concannon, but also told him how much money Concannon was actually winning. Allegedly, Donaghy was furious, and he felt like he wasn't getting enough from Concannon, and decided to make a pact with Batista for the 2006 and 2007 NBA season. The results of their pact were just as lucrative with Donaghy as before with Concannon.
So the arrangement that Donaghy had is that he was paid $5,000 for every win and nothing, he had no losses if he lost. So in other words, he had nothing to lose. At one point, Jimmy Batista was calling Tim Donaghy Elvis, which speaks to how good he was at helping him win.
We also made a deal kind of that I said, there's got to be games that you're in the locker room, you know what's going on, you're hearing things, whatever. If you see a game that is something that we want to double our bet or triple our bet on, we're going to call it a schmaga. With our wins and the schmagas together, it was like over $225,000 I paid him.
The scheme of Donaghy and Batista would end with Batista going to a rehab program for drug abuse. Once the partnership ended between Batista and Donaghy, Donaghy went to find a new bettor and went with Pete Ruggieri. Ruggieri and Donaghy would bet for about a month until Ruggieri ended the scheme because the lines were getting too wise to what Donaghy and Ruggieri were doing.
He starts betting now with another professional gambler named Pete Ruggieri, who also cooperated with the government. But the scandal continues. And then when Ruggieri shuts the scheme down because he realizes the lines are moving too much and he can't get his edge because he's no longer in control of the lines, he shuts the scheme down. And what happens? Donaghy complains to Martino that he wants one more game.
Even with the success for the better part of 4 seasons for Donaghy, eventually it would all come crashing down. After the partnership of Donaghy and Ruggieri is when the FBI would make their move.
In 2007, the FBI is investigating the mob, and Donaghy ended up being kind of a side character in what they were originally focused on.
The FBI section of the Gambino investigators had put up a wire through some sort of probable cause. I don't know what that was, but Tim was picked up with conversations between the other cooperator, and they then knew him. They just followed that and knew that there was a corrupt NBA official.
The FBI would eventually approach Donaghy, and he would cooperate with the investigation, bringing everyone down with him. Donaghy and Batista in particular would be handed 15-month prison sentences each. After Donaghy spent 15 months in prison, he later came out to a bunch of news sources telling his side of the story.
But in an interview with ESPN after he was released from prison, the disgraced referee insisted he had never fixed any games.
I was not actually in these games fixing the games and throwing calls to win a bet.
You expect us to believe that you did nothing to manipulate the outcome of an NBA game.
Everybody's entitled to their opinion, but I can just go back and tell you again that the FBI and even the NBA concluded without a doubt that I did not fix NBA games.
It's worth noting that the investigations of the FBI and NBA independently came to the conclusion that while Donaghy was illegally betting with insider information, they did not find enough credible evidence to indict him on charges of completely fixing games. However, there have been a few critical studies and a bunch of interviews with others close to the situation that give evidence that Donaghy was most likely rigging games.
But ESPN, the magazine, decided to conduct its own more complete analysis of all 40 games Donaghy officiated from the time he entered into an agreement with his co-conspirators up until the day their scheme fell apart.
Tim Donaghy, outside official, made the call late.
10 of the games were blowouts and therefore discarded from the analysis. In 23 of the 30 games that were competitive, Donaghy's calls favored the team that his partners had wagered on. That's 77%. In only 3 games did his calls go against their team. The calls were even in the other 4 games. The odds of that imbalance occurring randomly, 6,155 to 1.
Whether you believe Donaghy actively fixed games or if he only gave picks with insider information, the bigger problem is still there in this story. An NBA ref was in contact with betting syndicates and was getting backed financially by them for his picks or tips. In the case Donaghy wasn't rigging games, it easily could have been the case for the majority of NBA refs in his situation. Not only that, but if he was rigging games, then it went unnoticed by anyone for 4 full NBA seasons, which included crucial playoff games and even NBA championship games. Even more worrying was this interview of Donaghy by Colin Cowherd of Fox Sports Radio show The Herd about 7 years ago, where Donaghy tells Cowherd how many refs he believes gamble in the NBA.
Lots of men who are involved in sports gamble. If I was to suggest to you, Tim, if I said to you, do NBA officials gamble? Are there any of them that gamble? Forget the NBA, just gamble. What would you say the percentage is?
100%.
100% of NBA refs gamble.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was there and David Stern did his investigation, he said legal gambling will cost you your job. Illegal gambling will cost you your freedom. And then they did an investigation and found out 58 out of the 60 NBA referees gambled in some way, shape, or form, and they changed the rules. So now basically they're allowed to gamble.
Overall, the unique thing about the problem of match fixing is the different ways that it can start and play out. While it all leads to the same outcome, the differences between sports are eye-opening in how difficult this problem would be to stop. All it takes is one small interaction, one small initial meeting, and 2 individuals to help start a match-fixing scheme. However, the operation can grow and grow and grow into something that dominates entire levels of sport. It would not only take the governing bodies of sports, but governments and federations of countries and regions themselves to truly fix this issue. But even then, it's a problem that will forever be hard to track and hard to eliminate from every sport, in every league, in every corner of the world. In fans' eyes, it's a problem nobody wants to think about, but is inevitably always stuck in the back of their mind.